Thanks very much for coming out. As we've discussed many times in the past, Vancouver has a long and rich history of people gathering to express their views by participating in various protests and demonstrations. By the end of this year, we expect that we will have seen more than 1,000 protests throughout the city for people expressing their views on various issues. We support everyone's right to peacefully assemble and to express themselves, and we work hard to provide an environment that allows for peaceful protest. We also have an obligation to enforce the law when protests become unsafe or unlawful. Since October 7th, we've seen a significant increase in the numbers of people who are gathering to protest throughout the city. We've also seen a significant increase in the emotions that people are expressing as they do gather to protest. Last night, our officers responded to a spontaneous protest in the area of Main and Kiefer Street in Chinatown after approximately 250 people gathered to protest and surrounded a restaurant. Prime Minister Trudeau was inside the restaurant at that time, and the actions of the protesters did prompt a significant police response. Specifically, the protesters had surrounded the restaurant with about 150 protesters on Main Street out front and about another 100 in the lane behind the restaurant. We believe the protesters took some specific actions that caused us concerns, things like moving barricades to block a part of the lane that would have blocked vehicle access in the need of a quick response. The protesters also took steps such as linking arms to create a line or a barricade. We did not have advance notice of this protest. We often work with protest groups as they're planning protests, and we work collaboratively with groups to share information so that we can properly staff protests when they occur. In this case, we did not have advance warning of this protest. It was a spontaneous protest or a pop-up protest, and we responded quickly, deploying approximately 100 officers from various parts of the city immediately in order to maintain order, restore order, maintain order, and to disperse the crowd. During the process, and I should explain that as we responded, approximately 100 officers using crowd control, public order techniques that we've practiced and refined over many, many years, were deployed to manage the crowd, to create a safety bubble or a safety zone which allowed the Prime Minister and his detail to exit the restaurant and leave the area. Once the Prime Minister's had left the restaurant, and once the Prime Minister had left the restaurant and his security detail had left the area, we were able to disperse the group of protesters. During this process, one VPD officer was assaulted. A 27-year-old man was taken into custody. The VPD officer was part of the group of officers who was working to disperse the crowd. She was assaulted by a protester who we believe punched her in the face and attempted to gouge around her eyes. That protester was arrested, was taken to jail, and as of this morning was still in custody with charges being recommended. A second person, a 34-year-old man, was arrested for obstruction of police by taking deliberate actions as our officers were attempting to disperse the crowd. And specifically, this person took actions that we believe were obstructive of the police and the lawful execution of their duties while they were dispersing the crowd. That person was taken into custody, taken to jail, and has since been released pending further investigation, and charges may be forthcoming as a result of that. We expect in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, there will be continued protests. We expect that people will continue to gather to express themselves. We will continue to deploy officers as necessary to help facilitate peaceful protests, to maintain order, and to respond to unlawful behavior. We encourage people, if they are choosing to gather, to do so lawfully and to do so respectfully of others and other people's points of view. I'll attempt to answer any questions you have. Go ahead.
Were you called victim images? Were you called to the ERA, or did the Prime Minister's detail request your assistance?
I need to clarify that the restaurant that we responded to just before 10 o'clock yesterday evening was located in Chinatown on Main Street around Kiefer. I am aware that there are videos circulating online of an incident at another restaurant, and I want to ensure that there's not confusion, because there has been quite a bit of confusion in the media and on social media about two separate incidents that occurred. So the incident that I'm referring to that required the police response of approximately 100 officers occurred in Chinatown on Main Street. The incident that occurred at another restaurant, I believe it was on Canby Street, and I can't confirm that. I can't tell you for certain whether or not that drew a significant police response. I'm not aware that it did. There may have been officers who did respond or who were in the area, but it didn't require nearly the police response as was required in Chinatown.
So there was no call made from the first restaurant? It was just
I'm not aware.
Was the Prime Minister's safety at risk at any point?
So, as you can imagine, a large group of protesters had gathered surrounding a restaurant, and the Prime Minister was inside. The actions of the protesters, the numbers of them, the actions of them doing things like blocking the lane behind the restaurant caused a concern for us. And we took steps, keeping in mind we need to balance the public's right to peacefully assemble and peacefully protest by also maintaining order and upholding the rule of law. So our response was intended to balance those rights to ensure that everybody was safe, that people inside the restaurant were safe and that the protesters were safe, balancing their right to protest while also protecting everybody's safety.
And the large police response, 100 officers, again, did that call come from the Prime Minister's security detail, or was that like a BPD decision?
I can tell you that when we became aware that there was a large protest, we were not given advance warning. It was a pop-up protest or a spontaneous protest in our understanding. When we became aware that that large group had gathered, we immediately redeployed officers from throughout the city, pulling them from other neighborhoods and other areas of the city so that we could properly respond and resource what was happening down there.
Can you tell us how you became aware?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Can you give more details on the protesters who were the group and
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for the protesters, but what I can tell, or their views, but what I can tell you is that they were gathered to express their views on the ongoing situation in the Middle East, specifically the war between Israel and Hamas.
Have you talked to the protesters since to try and make inroads with communicating for future demonstrations?
So, as I said, we are always working with protest groups and always trying to work with protest groups when we become aware that protests are happening, and quite often we'll speak with them in advance to help facilitate marches or protests that are happening, whether it's at the Art Gallery or Jackpool Plaza or other places throughout the city. In this case, we were not aware of it. We will continue to attempt to follow up to learn more about who they were, what their plans were, and engage with them in the future so that we can help to, as I say, balance the need to have an environment where people can be free to peacefully assemble, to peacefully express themselves, while also balancing that need with public safety and our responsibility to maintain order and uphold the rule of law.
So you haven't reached out yet?
I can't say that for certain.
What about communications with the PMO or the RCMP since or before about, what can be done about this in the future? Like you say?
Yeah, sure, good question. So the Prime Minister has his own security detail. Whether it's the Prime Minister or another head of state or other dignitaries, when they arrive in Vancouver with their own security details, we will liaise with their security details. In this case, the Prime Minister has an RCMP security detail. I'm not going to get into specific details about conversations we have with them in advance or since, but I can tell you that we are always working with security details with the Prime Minister or with other dignitaries or heads of state to ensure safety.
And when you say balance between, the protesters and whatnot, what crossed the line? Obviously, punching somebody in the face crossed the line, but what line was crossed last night that caused you to take action, take people into custody, other than the obvious?
Two people were taken into custody. One person was arrested for assaulting a police officer. A second person was arrested for obstructing the police in the lawful execution of their duties.
But what was the obstruction, let's say?
I'm not going to speak specifically about what action the person took to obstruct the police officer. The matter is still under investigation and charges have not been laid.
So I'm just trying to get, if somebody's going to go to a protest, if they step in front of one of your officers, are they going to get arrested? If they look at him the wrong way, just trying to figure out what the line is between this peaceful protest and, a disruption to public
So what necessitated the Vancouver Police Department's response was approximately 250 protesters who appeared spontaneously outside a restaurant in Chinatown where the Prime Minister was dining. That's a large group of people in a small area. Our officers responded with the intention of controlling the crowd, managing the crowd, facilitating a peaceful protest. That certain people within that crowd engaged in unlawful behavior and were arrested as a result of that.
2 out of 250.
Yep.
That's not a significant number, right?
2 people were arrested.
In arresting that person who assaulted the officer, were they pepper sprayed? What happened there?
The person who assaulted the police officer, it was obviously engaging in assaultive behavior. There was a taser that was deployed during that arrest, and I believe that other physical control tactics were used during that arrest.
I'm sorry if I missed this at the start,
Yep.
but do you have a tally of demonstrations to date that the VPD has monitored?
You-
And how does that track with the historical average?
Yeah, we're up this year. The past number of years, we've averaged around 800 plus protests in the city of Vancouver for a variety of causes. Most of them environmental or geopolitical causes. 2023, we're well on pace to exceed 1,000 protests
So right
in the
now,
city of
over
Vancouver.
1,000, or we will be?
I'm sorry, I don't have a specific number, but we're certainly on pace to exceed 1,000 protests by the end of the year.
Are police concerned that protests are becoming increasingly confrontational, or that they will going forward? I mean, what we saw last night, are you concerned that we could see other incidents where there's clashes?
What I can tell you is that since October 7th, there have been an increased number of people who are coming into the city to participate in protests, and there's been an increased level of emotion displayed by people who are participating in those protests. There have been some conflicts, there have been some clashes, and there are police investigations that have resulted from some activity that has occurred at protests. We deploy officers. We plan ahead. We work with groups, and we monitor, for example, social media to fully understand what protests are planned, and so we can resource these events properly. And there have been occasions where our officers, for example, at the Art Gallery, shortly after October 7th, had to form a line between 2 different protest groups to prevent their very emotional and heightened behavior from becoming assaultive. And those are the control tactics, the public order tactics, the crowd control tactics that we've practiced and refined over many, many years in this city. And I'm talking about events like the Olympics, Occupy Vancouver, Stanley Cup playoffs, environmental, geopolitical protests. We have a long history of protests in the city of Vancouver. We support people's rights to peacefully assemble, to express themselves, but we also have a responsibility to balance that right with maintaining order and upholding the rule of law.